Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's always a great honor to rise and speak on behalf of the people of Timmins James Bay, particularly at this time of incredible uncertainty. And we noticed, and we are very pleased to see the Russian army who are suffering their defeats in Ukraine. But we are in a time of major global uncertainty, crisis in prices, crisis in supply chains. And what workers are being told is that their lack of ability to get higher wages, if they got somehow a more fair playing field, that it would exacerbate the inflation crisis. What we're calling for in New Democrats today is to focus in on where these inflationary problems are being driven. And they're being driven by gouging. Gouging by some very major, powerful corporate interests. Certainly the oil sector around the world, there's questions being raised about the massive profits that are coming out of the pockets of ordinary consumers who can't even afford to heat their houses. But the other really disturbing issue that we're seeing is the crisis in affordability of food. And that's directly tied to the price gouging that has been underway throughout this crisis. So what we're asking for is very straightforward, asking the Competition Bureau to launch an investigation into the grocery chain practices and increasing penalties for price fixing and strengthening competition laws to prohibit these companies from abusing their dominant positions in the market that is exploiting both consumers and agricultural producers. And we're also calling for the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Agriculture and Food to look into this, because we want to make sure that we're dealing with issues of fairness as people are being gouged and can't afford to pay their bills. Now, it's very interesting, and it's indicative today that we're debating this as the New Democrat motion on doubling the GST tax credit has received support from this House. Because we came into this Parliament saying we were going to fight for people who are being left behind in this time of uncertainty. So we brought forward 3 major initiatives for the fall. The doubling of the GST tax credit to get money right back into the hands of people and families and seniors so that they can buy their groceries. That for people who are low-income renters, that $500 supplement is essential for getting support at this time of gouging and particularly high housing prices. And of course, the initiative that the Liberals have now moved to agree with us on a national dental care plan, because if you cannot afford to get your kids' teeth fixed, all other issues drop off in comparison, because a child who can't get their teeth fixed and a mother or father who cannot afford that is a situation that should not be allowed to happen. Now, I know that my friends in the Conservatives have been very much against these initiatives. I appreciate the flip-flop on the tax credit, but the word that they've been using is that actual steps to help people in this crisis will somehow be vaporized by inflation, as though inflation is some kind of magic thing. And I'm interested in the term vaporizing, because the only thing that I've noticed that vaporized over the summer was the price of cryptocurrency, after the leader of the Conservative Party told us that he gets his financial advice from a conspiracy blogger on YouTube. Now, I know that they got a lot of their medical advice from anti-vax conspiracy bloggers on YouTube, but the idea that the leader of the Conservative Party was promoting cryptocurrency that dropped 70% in value after he began promoting it. Think of that for a minute, because I know a lot of working class people in Northern Ontario who don't have savings, who are insecure, who thought, well, maybe crypto would be a way of allowing me to get some kind of savings and something ahead. And they listened to the Conservative leader. 70% of that value vaporized. Well, I'll tell you what's not going to vaporize. It's getting that $500 check if you're a low renter, getting the $460 to $600 GST so that you can pay your rent. And what is not going to vaporize is hopes of children to get dental care. That's what New Democrats came to Parliament to do, is to actually get results for people. So what we need to do is strip off a lot of the mythologies and misrepresentations on what is causing inflation. Now, certainly I mentioned the Russian war at the beginning, and we know that that has destabilized the situation globally. But when you drill down on the numbers in Canada, it becomes very clear that certain powerful interests are using the fears of inflation to drive up their profits in their corporate lines. I mean, the CEO of Sobeys this year was made $8.6 million in compensation. I mean, what does this guy do to deserve this? And grocery rose nearly 11% in that time. So this is supposed to be the inflationary growth caused 11%, but the profitability that we saw from Sobeys, from Loblaws, from Metro are much higher than the rates of inflation, and the rates of wage earnings is much lower than the rate of inflation. So any worker who actually got an increase this year did not contribute to inflation. It is the gouging that's going on. CEO compensation at Loblaws, $5 million. Metro, $5 million. Sobeys, $8.4 million. And I want to focus in a little bit on the Weston family. Galen Weston, living in his gated community, found guilty of price-fixing bread. Bread. For crying out loud. And I want to thank Irene Brecken, a good Northern Ontario woman from the mining town of Elliott Lake, who led the class action suit. Now, does anyone think that Galen Weston is ever going to be punished for ripping off families over bread? That's not what happens to the super rich. What they do is they get free gifts. For example, $12 million to fix Galen Weston's fridge. Now, Madam Speaker, my mom, I'm thinking of Loretta Lynn today, my mom's a coal miner's daughter. I had to explain to my mom. She called me. She said, what the heck is this about the Liberal government fixing Galen Weston's fridges? What about my fridge? And I said, I know, Mom, it's really not right. We're trying to deal with this. Then when my mom comes home and tells me about the grocery prices that she's having to pay, and she's saying, what about Galen Weston and all that money he's making? I'm saying, don't you worry, Mom. We're going to make this right. That's why we're in the House today. Across party lines, we need to start saying to these CEOs, it's time, boys and women, that you could not anymore use inflationary fears to gouge working class families who have no choice but to go to the grocery store and pay for the food that they need for their children. Now, in our bill, we're not talking today about the oil gouging that's going on. But that has been one of the other massive drivers of inflation. You know, at the beginning of October, when the price of a barrel of oil is $80, prices were still 13% higher than they were the last time the price of a barrel was that high. And anybody, I'm sure anybody else in the country knows this, but anyone in Northern Ontario knows, as soon as the second that a hurricane hits down in the southern Gulf Coast, the price of gas at our local pumps jumps up 30 cents overnight. But when everything's going fine, that price doesn't come down. There's consistent gouging. And you don't have to believe me, Madam Speaker. I know people think that I'm the wild New Democrat from Northern Ontario. But I would say my good friend, the CEO of Shell, agrees with me. Because Shell, the CEO of Shell, is saying that the situation around the world is so unstable from the gouging of the oil companies that this crisis, he said, can no longer be left to the markets. It's time we started to tax that windfall back. The idea of taxing that extra massive amount of profit, we're not saying it's wrong to have profit. Profit's good. Profit is what drives industry. But when you're gouging people over their fears of inflation, if you're using the Russian war to pad your pockets. And how are they padding them? Well, let's talk about $52 billion in the second quarter of this year. That's up 235%. That's the kind of gouging that's going on. That when the United Nations, California, the EU, even President Biden is talking about the windfall tax that's necessary to pull some of that gouging back and restore it to ordinary Canadians. That's our job in this House of Commons, is to stand up for people who don't have a voice in the back room of power, who don't have the lobbyists, and who don't have the Cayman Islands to hide their tax accounts. They have to go and feed their kids. They deserve dental care, and they deserve an investigation into the gouging that's going on in the grocery stores right now. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'll ask my question picking up on the last comments that the member made. He talked about dental care in particular. I'm not sure if he caught it, but during question period, the Prime Minister basically asked the Leader of the Opposition, why won't you support dental care? Why won't you help put those smiles on children's faces? And the very odd response from the Leader of the Opposition was, well, they won't be smiling if they can't get, if their parents can't buy them a little bit of pumpkin pie, as if to suggest that that parents would rather give their kids pumpkin pie than to actually provide dental care. Is it just me, or are the Conservatives completely out of touch on what the most vulnerable in our society actually need?
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, Madam Speaker, those who say there's no such thing as miracles, I give my honourable colleague from the Liberals, who just until recently was dead set against a federal dental care plan, but he has seen the light, and I appreciate that. And when someone has seen the light, you have to welcome them into the light. Now, as for the Leader of the Conservative Party, what he's worried about, he has nothing to worry about with his pumpkin pie this week, and he doesn't worry about how much sugar is put in there for his kids, because he's had free dental care since he was, I don't know, when did he get elected? 24? 20-some years old. His family has got free dental care. All the Conservatives got free dental care. They just don't want working-class parents to get free dental care. That's the issue that I have. I don't care how many pumpkin pies you put on the table. Nobody's going to swallow that malarkey.